This film tells the story of one homeless service organization, the Downtown Emergency Service Center, or DESC, of Seattle, Washington, and how it uses strategic partnering to bring together the services that support recovery and end chronic homelessness in their city. DESC created internal partnerships to integrate its shelter, clinical services, and housing programs. DESC also created external partnerships with other community service and political organizations. DESC's community service partners include the Seattle Department of Human Services, the Seattle Police Department, the Mental Health and Drug Courts, and the local Medical Emergency Center at Harborview Hospital. DESC's political partners include the County Executive, the Mayor of Seattle, and the President of the Downtown Seattle Association. You'll see the story of how the political partners helped win the struggle to build a controversial housing and treatment program in downtown Seattle called the 1811 Project.
DESC is 25 years old this year. It got off the ground in November of 1979 and it basically was an emergency shelter created through a community planning process. DESC serves chronic homeless adults, adults that are living with severe and persistent mental disorders, chronic addictive illnesses, and a variety of programs that run from street outreach services that are offered by our clinical teams to emergency shelter services, and we also have a permanent supportive housing program. The ultimate objective is to engage mentally ill, drug, alcohol affected, and homeless people into clinical service relationships and move them into permanent housing.
Permanent supportive housing is clearly the answer to ending chronic homelessness, and at DESC we've developed a rather unique approach to that. We have a range of supportive housing alternatives available for consumers at our agency, that from moderately staffed scattered site projects to pretty intensively staffed multi-unit projects. The housing model that we've chosen to use is a blended model where property management functions and support service functions actually fall under the supervision of the housing project manager. At DESC, all of our project managers are social workers, and they're responsible for supervising two separate sets of staff. One set is responsible for rent collection, building security, integrity of the physical plant. The other set of staff is exclusively responsible for delivering support services. That's fairly unique in supportive housing nationally. I think the common version of supportive housing is a low-income housing operator contracts out for support services from another agency. We found at DESC that if you truly are screening in the sickest and most vulnerable, they need intensive supports, and that goes much more effectively if the support service staff are within the same organizational umbrella as the property management staff.
Our challenge is to take that person off the street, put them in permanent supportive housing, on the assumption that clinical and social stabilization is going to occur faster when you eliminate the chaos of homelessness from a person's life. Housing should not be seen as a reward for some period of demonstrated treatment compliance or some period of demonstrated stabilization to convince a housing project manager you're a safe risk. We take the person, we put them in housing.
Maybe that is too tight for me. Yeah.
You'll get used to it.
Hey, this is really neat.
We immediately develop the support service resource package that individual needs in order to gain the skills and insights necessary to self-manage whatever condition has caused them to lose housing in the past.
We currently have 346 units in 4 buildings that are intensively staffed, and those projects are called the Union Hotel, our first project, the Lion Building, which is a partnership between DESC and another organization called AIDS Housing of Washington, the Kerner Scott House, and the Morrison. In addition to those 346 units, we have about 130 scattered site units around the community that we control access to and place clients in who are being served by our clinical programs. We're also developing a lot more housing. By the end of 2005, we'll have over 600 units total. We'll have the 1811 Eastlake project open, which is 75 units, and we'll have another 60 scattered site units. DESC uses numerous funding sources for the development and operational support of our housing. We seek to encourage public policies that favor the population we serve, chronically homeless adults with disabilities.
The Policy Academy Steering Committee, Policy Academy on Chronic Homelessness, has, this is the second full meeting of this group.
DESC has completed a major renovation of its most significant building. In this building behind me is the shelter, which holds about 200 people, about 200 individual units, or 180 units of housing, and the administrative space. Over here we have the entrance to the shelter, and right next door is the administrative offices. Behind me is the Union Hotel. This is DESC's first housing development. It houses 52 individuals that are chronically homeless or were chronically homeless, disabled in one way or more. And it includes supportive housing, and everybody in there is on subsidized housing.
The shelter has a very close relationship with DESC's clinical programs. Case managers from our outreach and engagement mental health program are actually sited in offices inside the shelter. There are drug and alcohol treatment professionals from our team who are also sited in the shelter. The crisis respite program is another element of our clinical program that is based actually inside the main DESC emergency shelter. And in a separate, smaller shelter we have for homeless mentally ill women, there is another outreach and engagement mental health specialist who is sited actually at that shelter as well.
DESC is divided basically into three programs. We have emergency shelter programs, we have clinical programs, and we have permanent housing projects. We've had to learn that we need to develop internal partnerships between the staff and the housing projects, the clinical staff, and the shelter staff. And I think done that in a fairly successful fashion. And one of the main reasons that the internal partnerships are successful is the agency has developed a rather robust information services department that makes information sharing about clients in the three projects much easier for direct service staff and for consumers.
The information services role at DESC is to provide the infrastructure that allows our internal partnerships to work well. Our goal is to get all staff the information that they need in order to get their jobs done effectively. The more we know about a person, the better we can serve them. To make this happen, we developed a web-based system that's simple to use called Chasers. Chasers brings together everything we know about a client on one page. It allows the clinical, shelter, and housing teams that are serving the same clients to share information in real time.
We learned quite a few years ago that sending people to outside agencies for ongoing care just wasn't working. They weren't specialized to serve this population. So we went about creating components such as chemical dependency services, ongoing mental health treatment, outreach and engagement, and housing specialty programs and shelter. But with that, we complicated our own lives. So it puts a lot of stress on integrating our services well and treating our various programs like partners. It takes a lot of meetings and a lot of communication to do it right.
There's a regular meeting of staff who are involved in individualized services to shelter clients that occurs each day, and it's known as Support Services Brief, and that's where staff from our various departments get together to talk about new clients who show up in the shelter, clients who have been around who are having particular problems and so forth, and that includes staff from our host team, the Outreach and Engagement Mental Health Program, the Drug and Alcohol Treatment Program, the shelter-based information and referral case management team, typically the Healthcare for the Homeless nurse who's sited in the shelter as well would be part of that meeting. Another meeting involving the various DESC teams working in the shelter that occurs is a weekly meeting known as the Bar Review Committee, where individual clients who have had particular problems in the previous week and have actually been kicked out of the shelter for a short period of time have their cases reviewed. Our intent is to make sure that the presence of any one individual in the shelter is not going to jeopardize the safety of everyone else in the shelter.
If a client goes to the Bar Review Committee, the log entry that describes why they were barred allows staff to understand what happened even though they weren't there. Just as importantly, by providing all the information we know about that person, it gives a much richer context to the staff as they make a decision about that person's case.
But if we work at it enough times, and sometimes even in those moments where we just have a breakthrough, we'll start to break down the walls with a client. And it's pretty amazing sometimes the progress that we can make in that committee.
Over half of the people living in DESC housing also have a DESC mental health case manager. Chasers enables a very tight partnership between the clinical and housing programs. If a housing person writes a log about a resident, that information is immediately available to the clinical staff, to building staff, and to supervisory and management staff as well.
We're creating residential service plans for people with the express purpose of keeping them housed. Everything that we do in our housing projects in terms of providing individualized services to people is so that they will not lose their housing and return to homelessness.
External community partnerships include the Department of Social and Health Services, the Seattle Police Department, the Mental Health and Drug Courts, and the local medical emergency center at Harborview Hospital.
When I became director, the board of directors wanted to begin a 5-year strategic planning process, and it seemed to make sense to me that if we're going to make significant headroads in chronic homeless folks in Seattle, we need a lot more partners than just the provider community. The key to partnerships, without talking about the theoretical model so much, is discovering whether or not you have a mutually shared objective. And I think it's real clear that with business organizations, police departments, elected officials, neighborhood organizations, that we do have shared objectives. We want to end homelessness, chronic homelessness in Seattle, King County. We also need partnerships or collaborations with other service providers who have resources to bring to bear to our consumers that we might not have. Then you need to look at what resources each of the partners to the agreement can bring to bear on the problem and discover ways to begin to implement those resources and common purpose.
DESC has a partnership called the Host Special Project with our local state public assistance office, DSHS Belltown. This project expedites access to benefits for disabled clients with little direct involvement of the clients, many of whom won't tolerate the normal process.
Our Host Special Project is really an outgrowth, I think, of two agencies that recognized pretty early on the need for collaborative working arrangements. Belltown developed the techniques for helping people get onto Social Security benefits and SSI benefits, which later turned into a statewide SSI facilitation program. We are able to work directly with host case managers as a representative of the client to help pursue these applications, both for our general assistance program, which is kind of a precursor to federal benefits, and to helping them, supporting them, kind of case managing together the process of getting people to successfully apply for benefits.
I think today we needed to go over your SSI form.
I almost died a couple of times. My heart hurt so bad. I mean, I'm not playing the system or nothing, you know. You pulled me out a lot, you really have. I mean, you pulled me up when everybody shut me down, stepped on me like a bug. And it made me feel good. It made me feel like a human being again.
From our point of view, I think this project has been very successful.
So it's that consistent partnership like we're talking about here, you know, that makes the difference. Actually, the approval rate has been going up. But for the longest time, it seemed like the approval rating was like about 30%, it seems like. And now all of a sudden it's like 60%.
I've found SPD to be remarkably responsible. In Seattle, we're pretty fortunate in having a very progressive senior leadership.
It has come about through a long process of forging relationships of trust, of mutual interest, of also understanding our respective roles.
We utilize the police to help us in crisis situations, and we are a fairly substantial source of support to the police when they encounter people on the streets with nowhere to go. We make shelter space available to referrals from police officers.
So creating relationships, liaisons, systems of support become absolutely critical, with Bill taking the lead to bring the human service providers, the leaders in this field, into a regular dialogue with the police precinct, the downtown precinct, on a monthly basis to talk about common issues, to resolve problems. We just, the department just initiated a program that I'm very excited about, and it seeks to take all of our so-called field training student officers and over the course of a week, standardized program, bring them to various shelters and programs around the city to observe and to work alongside of human service providers and therapeutic specialists. And centerpiece of that program is a day spent at the Downtown Emergency Service Center.
Your staff are excellent. The people you have working here are very professional.
Future classes should definitely come in here and learn what goes on here, because it is a resource to use.
Today, I know I feel a lot more compassion towards people. Like I have a better understanding of what really goes on with people's lives and how disenfranchised people can become with really no action on their part to make that problem worse.
Who, though in the midst of crisis, they can contact to place somebody or to otherwise seek alternatives to incarceration, because nobody, particularly those that have mental health and behavioral issues, get better in jail.
When I first became county executive, I was asked to build a third jail. We already had 2 adult jails, and we had a juvenile facility. I said, I'm not going to do it. You build it, we'll fill it. I'll grab that money that we would apply to a jail and would put it in alternative programs for juveniles and for adults, so that we would pay for healthcare programs, job service programs. We would supplement, augment our programs for alcohol, drugs, mentally ill, public health work, but that we would treat that as a criminal justice cost.
It makes no sense to have a minor misdemeanor living in the King County Jail more nights than not in the course of any one year. I don't think anybody sees that is an efficacious use of the community's resource. Mental health court and drug court provide major ways to divert mentally ill, minor misdemeanants back to the community for treatment and supportive housing.
But both that mental health court and that drug court have been able to drive down our populations that are in jail, and we've been able to put people in more structured environments. And again, the nice thing is that it lowered the crime rate. It lowered inside the city as well as outside the city. It lowered the juvenile crime rate. It's been a pretty remarkable and very successful.
Drug court couldn't work without a partnership with the community service providers, such as, for example, DESC. We absolutely must work in a collaborative fashion, because you can't simply get a part of the picture and be successful working with these clients. When a person's charged with a crime, a drug-related crime, ordinarily they would be faced with the opportunity to set the case for trial, contest the charge, or to plead guilty to the charge and be sentenced, placed on traditional probation. That was the system that wasn't seeming to create a lot of success for those that were involved in drug addiction. And there tended to be a real revolving door with respect to those individuals that were charged with drug crimes. The fact that we have partnerships with entities such as DESC that allows us to refer clients in need and know that they're going to get the services that they need, the case management, the the chemical dependency treatment, the counseling. That is so satisfying and so gratifying as a judge.
Okay. I just graduated relapse prevention actually last Tuesday.
Great. And let's see. Oh, I'm going back to work. Anyway, life is wonderful. Nice.
About two-thirds or three-quarters of our folks are homeless. If indeed the defendant decides to be in our court, then the caseworkers at DESC work closely with our probation officers.
Judge, I remember a while ago I used to give you poems. So long from home. So far away in time, in distance from the heart. So long from home, of forgotten absences, of missing lackings, of might have happens, of could have beens. So long from home is someone away. So long from home that cannot return.
I'd just like to take a second and just tell Rick that I'm really impressed with the hard work he's been doing. It's obvious that the housing was an integral piece. Keep up the good work. Rick.
Thank you, Stephen. If it wasn't for you guys' work, I wouldn't have been able to have the place. I mean, I would still be sleeping in doorways.
Harborview Hospital is a major medical center in Seattle and in the Northwest, and it clearly is the major provider of medical services, emergency services for homeless populations.
We've had a very long and close connection with Harborview Medical Center, most prominently with the emergency department, where there is routine daily communication that occurs between our main shelter and the ER. The ER oftentimes sees people who are treated and ready to be released or discharged, but have nowhere to go, and we are a very common source for them to call to make a referral and send someone down for the night and for connection to other kinds of services. We also have a highly vulnerable population with a lot of fairly severe medical problems, and folks are sometimes in need of urgent medical care, and so we are in a position to send people to Harborview for that kind of care.
There were meetings between the county, Harborview, and Downtown Emergency Service Center. The mentally ill, homeless individuals that were seen at Harborview often were discharged without placement. They would either be sent back to the streets or to a shelter and would recycle over and over again into the emergency room and would not get good treatment in the community.
The crisis triage unit tries to stabilize anybody who comes here with a behavioral health care crisis of any type, whether that be substance abuse related or mental health, and decides where they're going to go, whether they're going to end up in the hospital, back home, or in many cases out to a shelter and down to DESC's crisis respite program.
External political partners include the county executive, the mayor of Seattle, and the Downtown Seattle Association.
We're an advocacy group for the health and vitality of downtown, and we've been an organization for 45 years. We have about 400 members, mostly the large companies in downtown, but also all of the arts organizations, most of the human services organizations, and a number of residents.
Often, especially with business owners, they want to basically see their return on investment, and the work that DESC does works, is effective, and so it is encouraging for folks to see that by investing in DESC, we are helping to save our community money in the long run, because the people who otherwise would be accessing crisis services such as the jails, the courts, the hospitals, the sobering centers are instead living in stable housing, receiving ongoing treatment for a mental illness or drug and alcohol addiction, and are not accessing those services at the same rate.
Don't overlook the fact that human service providers in the business community have the same goals.
The 1811 project is one of the most unique projects I've ever been associated with in my life in any kind of work environment. It's a project for chronic public alcoholics. Effectively, it accepts a chronic alcoholic where they are and puts them into housing immediately, right off the street, and does not require abstinence, even goes so far as to permit drinking in the room. The objective of the program is twofold: to get people living in the project to reduce consumption and the harmful effects that chronic alcoholism invariably afflicts on people, and also to suppress utilization in these very expensive crisis alternatives. A number of years ago, the King County Executive and the Mayor of Seattle were very concerned about that population and wanted to do something about them. The executives acknowledged that since that time, two things were happening with the population. First, they were dying at incident rates much greater than any other subset of homeless people on the streets. But before they died, they were consuming extraordinary amounts of taxpayer-funded crisis alternative services.
Our support of the 1811 project is actually pretty interesting because it depended on some education of business members. Bill brought some research to our Human Services Committee about the cost of housing chronic alcoholics versus letting them be on the street. And it was a big wake-up call for the business community because it turned out that providing housing and supported services for chronic alcoholics was cheaper than treating them over and over again in the emergency room.
We have people who sleep in the alleys and on the streets of our city. They're chronic inebriates. There are people who are probably in the terminal stage of alcoholism. And the question is, how do you most humanely deal with these folks? And the 1811 project proposes to deal with them by providing housing. But really, if we don't deal with that core part of the homeless issue, how are we ever going to get to the point where we aren't just triaging homelessness, but we're solving it?
You know, it was easy for the county to stand up and say, not only are we going to provide money for your facility in terms of its capital projects, but we're going to bring the services in to deal with that population as well. And that King County government will be the entity that will centralize those services, because it's only in this government that you have alcohol and drug services, mental health services, tuberculosis services, public health examinations, AIDS, HIV services, dental services. So we're able to look at homelessness and integrate it with other services, because that's where we have to go.
We as a board, and myself personally, have supported this initiative.
This project has, it's sort of interesting. The neighborhood in which the project is located has not objected to it. The principal objections have come from one single wealthy commercial realtor that has a couple of office towers within a 2-block radius of this project. And this organization and its CEO began a legal assault on the project that tied it up in courts for 18 months. In May of 2004, we won our last case at the Washington State Supreme Court, defending our right to build it. And we broke ground on the project in late August of 2004. Throughout the legal struggle, our partners were wonderful in their support of us, assisting us in the legal defense. Half of the legal fees were pro bonoed to us through the advocacy of the Downtown Business Association. That's a pretty robust partnership.
And homelessness, which people see as a problem that will never be solved, I don't believe that. I think that if people have the political will, if elected officials have the political will, along with the business community and the nonprofit community, that we can end it.
A lot of it is showing the more human side of the work that we do. Homelessness has become such a fabric of our society, part of the fabric of our society, that people sort of see past the fact that people on the street struggling with chronic conditions are actually people.
In the end, both of our institutions or enterprises seek to make the world better than the way we found it, to make it more safe, to make it more humane.
I, as an executive, will never ever say that it's okay to strip away a person's dignity. You got to see the humanity in them.
If you can get to the humanity of it, I think that you've gone a long way to dealing with the politics of it.
In my opinion, there is not a comprehensive mental health center in this country, a conventional drug alcohol treatment agency in this country, or a homeless service provider organization in this country, or a community in this country that cannot replicate what DESC has done in the last 25 years. Because leaving mentally ill, drug alcohol affected people on the streets of inner cities is simply not an acceptable thing. And I think all provider organizations concerned with behavioral health or homelessness should dig a little deeper into their organizational soul and think about what they can do to end the struggle of chronic homelessness.